Everything about the Mario games is designed for pure, unadulterated fun, from the bright colors to the silly characters to the laissez-faire attitude towards the laws of physics. The music is no exception to this, with each soundtrack perfectly capturing the carefree spirit of the games themselves. But what makes this music sound fun? What makes it sound so distinctly Mario? Well, it actually has a lot to do with why the games themselves are fun to play. Probably the most obvious of Super Mario's strengths is its simplicity. You see bottomless pits, you jump over them. You see coins, you jump into them. You see enemies, you jump onto them. The rules of the games are so intuitive that even absolute novices can understand and enjoy them. And this is true of the music as well. Simple, catchy melodies decorate the levels and stick in your brain long after you put down the controller. The key word is accessibility. No matter how musically illiterate you are, even if you've never taken so much as a single piano lesson as a kid, you can still sing along to the Mario theme. This is partially because of strong melodies that consist mostly of basic chord tones. The first, third, and fifth of a chord are the easiest to hear and the easiest to sing over that chord, so crafting a melody out of mostly these notes makes them accessible to a larger, maybe less musically experienced audience. So the music is easy to get into, but why is it so memorable? I mean, the original Super Mario Bros. Theme is still stuck in everyone's heads 30 years after the game came out. First off, most Mario music starts off with a big unison hook to draw the listener in. It works the same way as a hook in a story or movie. You want to start off with something big and exciting to grab the listener's attention before getting into the meat of the work. Keeping these intros short and entirely in unison makes it impossible for the listener to get distracted, since there's no other parts to listen to and no time to think about anything else. Once we get past the intro, the melodies themselves are plenty memorable on their own. Even though they all use a lot of simple chord tones, they're not boring because they all use incredibly dramatic rhythms, and as far as making a melody catchy goes, the rhythm does most of the work. Look at the beginning of the very first Super Mario Bros. Overworld theme. The actual note choices are all pretty standard in that other than one chromatic note, which we'll talk about later, they never stray too far from the tonic chord. It's pretty simple stuff if you look at it that way, but the rhythm of the melody is so dramatic and interesting. We get this big strong rhythmic figure kicking us off, followed by a ton of offbeats with a quarter note triplet thrown in the middle. Rhythmically, the melody can barely sit still. Not to mention the shape of the melody. The range of this opening figure is a whopping 11th, which admittedly puts it outside of the easily singable range, but while accessibility is a priority in writing these soundtracks, making the music exciting is always going to be more important. Plus, there are other ways to make a melody memorable. For instance, handling motifs is crucial for writing a melody that stands the test of time. Luckily, Koji Kondo, the composer for the Mario series, is a master at taking one or two small motifs and turning them into a whole theme. This is what gives a piece of music depth. Take a look at Super Mario 64's Bob-omb Battlefield music, for instance. The whole A section is built from just one motif, and it's crafted expertly. It's a genius piece of writing. The constant repetition of this main motif ingrains it in our mind, but each repetition is altered just enough so it doesn't get, well, repetitive. The structure aids the memorability and accessibility as well. The first introduction of the motif outlines our tonic triad. The second time, it outlines our predominant 4 chord. This third time, we get some more drastic variation to keep it interesting and give the melody momentum. Stretching this leap to an octave and using this 3-beat rhythmic pattern creates drama, but the most memorable part of the motif is left completely intact. This time it outlines our dominant chord, placing heavy emphasis on the 5th scale degree of the key, which if you take the melody as a whole gives us a 1-4-5 structure. This is one of the most fundamental and familiar structures in all of music. and one that everybody has heard countless times whether they're aware of it or not. Having it laying the foundation of this tune is what makes the music simple to understand, even if the actual harmony on top embellishes the 5 chord a fair amount. In the second half of the A section, a lot changes. The first phrase jumps up to the flat 7, making a C7 sound which sets up the move to the 4 chord F. The second phrase is bumped up an octave from the last time, which creates rising tension. And the last phrase inverts the leap before giving us a big finish to the tonic. That's 16 bars of music with an impeccable interest curve, all made from one small 2-bar motif. It's easy music to listen to or sing along to, and it's insanely catchy, but the amount of thought that went into its composition is nothing short of impressive. Riding the line between accessible enough for the masses and interesting enough for the aficionados is the hardest thing for a composer to do, and Koji Kondo does it spectacularly. But it's not just the music that accomplishes this balance. Mario may be simple to understand, but the games are far from simple to beat. They always start off easy, teaching you the techniques you'll need to progress through your adventure, and putting you in situations where it's intuitive what actions you need to take. As the game progresses though, you're gradually introduced to more and more challenging scenarios that add more and more different kinds of obstacles to overcome, all while maintaining the core concepts introduced in the beginning. It's a perfect example of easy to learn, difficult to master. There's another way that the music achieves this sort of depth too. For how jolly the soundtracks are, they each use a frankly shocking amount of chromaticism. This challenges the ear, so to speak, and keeps the music from being bland. So how do we use chromaticism to challenge the listener without sacrificing an upbeat and overall happy tone? Well, harmonically, we often hear mode mixture incorporated to introduce chromaticism, typically as either the flat 6, flat 7, or minor 4 chords. It's important to note that this generally will make music sound darker as you're borrowing chords from the parallel minor key, but in Mario music these generally resolve back to the major key straight away. We also hear lots of secondary dominants which introduce chromaticism in a slightly brighter way. This is just when you take a chord and set it up with its own personal dominant chord as if it were the center of the universe for a second. An offshoot of the secondary dominant technique is the use of passing diminished chords. If you take a chord, approach it by a semitone, and then build a diminished chord off of that note, you have a passing diminished chord. It's usually used to connect 2 chords a whole step away, so you get some nice chromatic bass motion filling out the space in between the chords. If you want, you can think of it like a secondary dominant flat 9 chord without the root note. Melodically though, and this is where it gets interesting, we see a ton of chromatic approach tones. Chromatic approach tones are notes that aren't in the key, but resolve up or down immediately to a note that is in the key. It's easy to assume that an out-of-key note should sound bad or scary or something, but it's all about how you use them. Introducing a dissonance and then resolving it so quickly doesn't give the listener time to hear it as a dissonance, so it just kind of blends into the overall sound of the phrase. In doing so, it makes the overall sound of the phrase one that seems like it's not taking itself so seriously. Here, just listen and you'll see what I mean. You can hear how it sounds kind of silly or rather lighthearted, much like the series as a whole. Seriously, an Italian stereotype with an insane vertical stomps his way through turtles, ghosts, and cross-dressing dinosaurs to get to a castle only to find out 7 times in a row that he got to the wrong one? This is not a game that takes itself too seriously, and that's great. It's what gives it its charm. But that's not to say the game isn't serious. A crazy amount of work goes into making something that can afford not to take itself seriously, and that goes for both the games as a whole and the soundtracks. Koji Kondo worked on the original Super Mario Bros. Overworld theme for a long time, tweaking it continuously during the development of the game to make sure it fit the tone perfectly, and his efforts paid off. This sort of meticulous work and dedication is needed to pull off the most important part of what makes the Super Mario games fun, which is that they just plain feel good to play. The development team for Super Mario 64 famously worked only on fine-tuning Mario's movement on a simple grid at first, making sure it just felt good to make him run and jump around before starting work on any of the actual levels. For everything I've said about accessibility and depth, all of it would be pointless if the basic actions you used in the game were boring to do. It just feels good to move around in these games, and when it comes down to it, that's why people keep playing them. For music to feel good on the same instinctive level, it all comes down to groove. Groove is the part of music that makes you want to dance, or nod your head, or scrunch up your face like you just ate a whole lemon. Whether or not something grooves can be a little bit subjective, in the way that a metal song will approach this differently than a funk tune, for example, and everyone has their own musical preferences. But each genre just takes a different route to get to the same place. Good music always has to feel good to listen to, on an instinctive level. If I had to pick the style of music that I thought most closely resembled the silly, cheerful way that Mario games feel, I would have to pick New Orleans' Second Line. It has the same feel-good lightheartedness to it. This makes sense because the Super Mario series music draws heavy inspiration from the jazz genre, especially early jazz, to capture this feeling. Everything from ragtime to funk to bossa nova to big band swing to gypsy jazz has been used by the Super Mario games at one point or another, but one thing that all of these styles share, and arguably the one thing that unites all of the different styles under the jazz umbrella, is rhythmic syncopation. Syncopation is the emphasis of an offbeat or upbeat in contrast to a downbeat. Here, remember what I said about the original Super Mario Bros. Theme being really interesting rhythmically? Let's listen to it again. Now, let's remove all of the syncopation, leaving every note on the beat. It's boring, right? It totally kills the music. Putting emphasis on the offbeats makes the music bounce, and this is what jazz musicians focus on to make their music feel good. Let's look at some other good examples of syncopation in the Super Mario games. Most of the other techniques I've talked about, especially the secondary dominance and the chromatic approach tones, are drawn from jazz music as well, specifically from jazz standards, which are typically Tin Pan Alley tunes or old Broadway show tunes that got covered by a ton of jazz artists in the early to mid 20th century. Before I go, I just want to show off a couple other things that Super Mario music takes from this era that add to the Mario sound. The augmented 5 chord. Moving to the 4 chord on the bridge. The 3-6-2-5-1 progression. Well, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what your favorite tune from the Super Mario series is in the comments below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those too, or tweet them to me at 8-Bit Music Theory. If you liked this video and want to help me make more of them, consider checking out my recently launched Patreon page. These videos take a lot of time and a lot of hard work, and any support is greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.